Well, what is a facilitative mindset? First of all, facilitate means to make easy. And I'm suggesting that a facilitative mindset is an awareness and intention to enhance open communication, foster collaboration, resolve conflict, to achieve organization effectiveness and performance improvement. So during this presentation, I'm going to present to you some concepts and models that I found useful that apply to organizational, interpersonal, and individual dynamics. And throughout the presentation, we'll have the opportunity to do some self-reflections so you can ground your own experience in what I'm sharing. As a preface to this presentation, let me give you a brief overview of where I'm coming from, some of the influences that have affected my mindset in terms of my background experiences. My academic background is in sociology. I studied a microsociology called ethnomethodology, which is a study of how people make sense of their social interactions, in situations like conversation analysis. I then worked as a research assistant at UCLA School of Public Health on a National Institute of Mental Health funded project called the Database of Program Evaluations, where we were identifying what works in the treatment of a wide range of mental health and addictive behaviors. We put this into a database that was then used for practitioners in that time, the Community Mental Health Center, to determine what would be the best practices to use for their clients. I continued in the information systems world, working at SDC, System Development Corporation, which was a offshoot of RAND. There I was doing end user support and documentation for a range of scientific databases that serve the professional industries and businesses. So that's where I discovered training and development. I found that a lot of the documentation I was doing was job aids. And I got referred into the training and development field as an independent instructional designer, doing a lot of work on systems implementation, documenting and helping facilitate the transition from one computer system to a new one, kind of change management. These were done for clients in the business, of insurance, banking, finance, where large systems were being implemented. The one significant learning in that endeavor, if you will, was that the biggest factor in the success or potentially the failure of such implementations was what? Communication. Communication between the developers, the end users, the stakeholders. And so the more communication there was, the better chance of the implementation succeeding. From there, I transitioned into the OD and OE field. My first job as an OD practitioner was on a 3-year contract with the Internal Revenue Service, where I was a member of a cadre of regional practitioners where we were doing a range of facilitations in terms of team building, strategy development. It was a management union environment, if you appreciate, so there's a lot of that going on. And also, we were implementing a diversity program. Got trained in the program developed by R. Roosevelt Thomas, who is the author of Beyond Race and Gender. And so continuing looking at dealing with communication issues. And over the time, I've worked for a wide range of government, nonprofit, small business, and other industries, doing this kind of work. A number of years ago, my books, The Inner Work of Work, were published, and that kind of transitioned me into a practice that combines facilitation, coaching, mediation, dialogue, and process work, of which I'll touch on as we go through the presentation. And then, as a footnote, I've had a lifelong, if you will, avocation as a visual artist. There's my website if you're so curious. And I'm sharing this with you for a very specific reason. Here's some thoughts I want to put out as we go through the presentation. First one is, quote from Charles Bukowski, who says that an intellectual says a simple thing in a hard way. An artist as a hard thing in a simple way. Well, I mentioned my own background in art, and of course, I certainly have an intellectual background in our profession. So I'm finding myself blending these two, especially in this way, trying to simplify some of the very intellectual concepts that we work with. Secondly, from the field of general semantics, Alfred Korbisky, to appreciate that the map is not the territory. Again, the models, concepts that I'll be sharing with you are the maps. The territory is what's in front of you, the people you're working with in your practice and the experiences you're having. And I trust that as we go through this, looking at the models, you can reflect on some of your own experiences to see how they relate to those maps. The first map I'd like to share with you is kind of an overarching map about the world of work. This is based on my guidebooks that I had published about 25 years ago by Barrett Kohler about the inner work of work, which were guidebooks to guide people through three distinct areas of work. The first being your best, by demonstrating commitment and purpose through self-awareness and the choices you make. Some of this shows up in people's reaction to change, and there's typically a few of them. Some people get really on board with change and can't wait to get involved. Some may take a wait and see attitude, and some people resist change. So those mindsets affect how their performance may be perceived or evaluated. The second dimension is getting along with others by exhibiting behaviors that enhance interpersonal communication and collaborative relationships. People often refer to these kinds of things as soft skills. I've always kind of called them strategic skills. And getting along with others, and I mentioned that I have done mediations, and if you're familiar with the process of mediation, mediator meets with two people individually before you bring them together to try to resolve their conflict. And initially hearing each person's story about what the issue was. And I've heard stories, people quite passionate about the grievances and that's been perpetrated upon them, so to speak. And I inevitably ask the following question. Please tell me, now, when did this start happening? Thinking that it was very prescient and quite immediate. Well, often these kinds of issues have been festering for months, years, many years. And point being is, consider the effect on the organization. And I'm going to touch on that in a few minutes as well. The third component is contributing to your company's success by connecting the big picture with the bottom line to create performance results. People are evaluated on their performance, and especially in the nature of training, I learned early on when I was working at Xerox, they had a whole model for how to present training and make it relevant to people by explaining to them why this training you're going through is relevant and it's going to be important and how they're going to be successful in accomplishing it to meet the performance expectations. So again, building such understanding up front is at minimum a motivational tool to ground people in, why am I doing this and how can I best connect? Even though their job may not be totally strategic, they may be part of an operational unit removed from the big picture, but they can find how their small part of it, as it were, fits into the success of the company. Related to connecting the big picture with the bottom line is one of the most, shall I say, significant issues that I have discovered in facilitating within organizations. And that has to do with the challenge, if you will, of clarifying who has expectations of whom about what by when. So let's talk about where do expectations come from. Here's a model. So here's expectations in the middle. So expectations, let's look at the top. There's the economic climate. What's going on in the world of business, the stock market, or like, again, from an organizational standpoint, how is that affecting what we're doing within our organization? There at the bottom is organizational culture, how we do things around here. As we know, all organizations have a different culture or approach to how they hire talent and who's involved. Take it then from the standpoint of the external customer, the people you're serving. Always the issue of the mission statement. Mission statement. How do I provide? What do I provide to enable my customer or client to succeed? That's kind of a mission. So what's the expectations of external customers? Are you fulfilling a mission to their benefit? And then internal customers, within any organization, there's multiple departments and you have to communicate, collaborate, work with resources and the like. And there's all sorts of expectations and hierarchies and the like that affect how that kind of work is done. And then, management. Management is, looking to have the right talent and resources to meet the objectives or the, strategy within the organization. And then on the other side is the role performer. Any job role, what's their expectations? How is their performance evaluated? Back to for the last slide. Do they understand how what they're doing contributes to the overall picture? Though they may not be part of the strategic, dimension. They're fulfilling a certain role to meet a certain objective. So clarifying expectations, a very important part of a facilitative mindset. Related to the issue of clarifying expectations is the challenge, ability to discuss undiscussables. Right? Well, maybe aware of the work of Chris Argyris, Peter Senge, and others who, looked at the nature of undiscussables. And what are they? It's an uncomfortable assumption or belief that's so rooted in the individual or organizational behavior that we're not conscious of it anymore. And by not discussing them in an open, honest way, can affect, inhibit, and have an impact on organization performance and effectiveness. So again, adding to the facilitative mindset, how do we even begin to surface undiscussables? So with undiscussables in mind, let's do a reflection on your own. So take a minute, recall a situation when unclear or undiscussed expectations affected your organization and your own work as a practitioner in that organization. What was going on? Well, it was a change issue, strategy issue. What was going on in this particular situation you're reflecting on? What happened or didn't happen? Is there an expectation to meet a deadline or an objective? What changed or didn't change? Were you able to surface the undiscussable? Was it still even unknown to people to inhibit progress? And so, what was the effect on the organization by not discussing the undiscussable? Or if you did discuss it, how did that shift the dynamic? So take out another 30 seconds or so to reflect on this and see if you have an insight about this, an insight. What's coming up for you? And if you like, share it in the chat. Now, I suggest you share not the whole story, but maybe just an insight, a little light went on. What happened? What didn't happen? What did you learn from this experience? And if you'd like to share it with others, that'd be great. Let me connect some of the threads we just went through about issues of undiscussables, clarifying expectations, conflict, and how it affects potentially the bottom line within an organization. Let me present this 1-minute video that talks about minimizing transaction costs.
Well, my tip, I think the key to collaboration and actually cost effectiveness is to minimize transaction costs. And transaction costs are those costs that are off your profit and loss statement. Those are the costs incurred when you don't collaborate, or you have misunderstandings, or you have conflict, or people aren't communicating, meaning people within your organization or with your customers or your stakeholders. So every time you have a misunderstanding or a rework, it's going to cost you money, and that's a transaction cost. So the key to that is to get people to communicate, share and clarify expectations, negotiate understanding, and have conversations, dialogue with each other to understand what each person expects. Therefore, you'll minimize transaction costs, save money, be more productive, and do well. Save money, be more productive, and do well.
Okay, let's hold that thought. So as we move on, let's expand upon, opportunities to kind of minimize transaction costs. Here's a graphic that outlines the nature of where the various leverages are in how we facilitate, because facilitation happens at different levels in an organization. So at the simple level, just being mindful or aware of how we're approaching what we're doing. At the executive level, typically executives are looking at the big picture, the strategic direction. That's the value of executive compensation. They're guiding the organization forward. On some level, I've always thought that executives actually have the biggest OD role in an organization, and your role may be supporting them and doing what they're trying, helping them try to achieve what they're achieving. Again, and reinforcing the management, again, is working with resources and practices, and perhaps looking at operational strategy and the like, trying to implement some of the larger strategic directions. And there's levels that you're dealing with management and the like in terms of programmatically and otherwise, in managing their own staff. And again, like I say, staff, just to reinforce staff, people doing various job roles, have performance expectations that one may be facilitating to help them improve it. And oftentimes that becomes, in the training field. Candidly, if I could even be further, at that level, it's training. At management, it may also be more of those, team building and other facilitative interventions. And executive, that may be where you're actually coaching people. So there's actually different facilitative methodologies, if you will, depending on what level that you're working with. Now, I've been alluding to conflict throughout this presentation so far, and I want to present this model for how one may perceive the nature of conflict within an organization. If you look at conflict as an opportunity for problem solving or moving ahead, that's one mindset to begin with. But also to consider that conflict occurs when people disagree on various things. At the top there is a pyramid. The top is facts. Typically, and I say typically, it's easier to help get people to agree on facts if you're presenting evidence, and that's typical. Facts can be, resolved more empirically, without too much dissonance. Down next from that are, methods. How are we going to get something done? Who's going to be making the decisions? Oh, there's all sorts of ways decisions are made in terms of, am I empowered to make the decision? Do I need to refer it? Is it going to go up the ladder to an ultimate person who may veto what I, suggest? So understanding how decisions are made or methods are done becomes another level of where misunderstandings or conflict may occur. Then the goals, are we all on the same page for what the goal is for this particular project? Do we have deadlines or projections that we're needing to meet? Have we negotiated those expectations at the level of goals, and how is that resolved? And then at the bottom level, if you will, and sometimes below the surface of this pyramid, are beliefs and assumptions. We all hold beliefs and assumptions, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that in a minute, but typically those are the most almost undiscussables that are most difficult to resolve. So again, this model just gives us another way of looking at something from how we are applying our facilitative mindset in approaching how we're working on these issues. Now here's a matrix, if you will, developed by Will McWhinney. He was a local OD practitioner. He taught at the Fielding Institute, and he's written books on paths of change that you may find interesting. I certainly did. This particular model has helped me immensely in terms of trying to understand mindsets, others' mindset, as well as my own. And what McWhinney has 4 quadrants, what he calls, what are my beliefs most like? And let's just go through these. At the upper right are sensory. And those approaches that rely on facts, data, objects, material things, events, happenings, predictability, the tangible kind of, I'll believe it when I see it. I mean, I have to really feel it to, grasp it as a, something I want to approach. Underneath that are, we'll call, social approaches, which more, the more communicative values. Let's talk about our values, our preferences, and what matters in all this, the purposes, wants, needs, motivations, ethics, feelings. This tends to have that more engaging kind of mindset, if you will. Okay, willing to work things out with others and try to, figure out what's the, to come to a kind of a consensus or the most collaborative approach, if you will. On the upper left is what McWhinney refers to as unitary. Rules, policies, theories, strategies, truths, assumptions, creeds, beliefs, classifications. It is written, so to speak. It is written. I remember one of my experiences, I mentioned I worked at the IRS for a little while, and which you can well imagine is a very policy-driven organization. But one of my most enjoyable conversations when I was working with the director of the LA branch here, he said, Michael, sometimes I guess, when we're doing things, there are contradictions in what we do. So having kind of a mindset, that was a very unitary organization, if you can well imagine. So, and then finally we have what we call mythic. Kind of what we're talking about today is kind of mythic. It's ideas, symbols, images, meanings, metaphors, dreams even. How are we dreaming up what we're doing? What's what's our inspirational or opportunities? The future way of thinking. So again, another these are all like mindsets that people have, and typically we all kind of have a blend of them. And, I would suggest as practitioners, we find ourselves appreciating the variations. We may find ourselves in one of these quadrants more than not, but to appreciate where other people are coming from in an organization can certainly improve the ability to facilitate, differences as as issues and dynamics emerge. Dialogue. Nowadays, I mean, we use the word dialogue. Sometimes we use it more generically than not, meaning discussion or conversation. However, dialogue in a more probably formal practice developed by David Bohm, who's a physicist, looks at dialogue in a very special, unique way of conversing. And he speaks about how human relations, people generally have a way of not directly facing anything. We talk around things, avoiding difficulties and the like. So looking at it, how do we kind of get beyond that? And he suggests that dialogue is a new form of conversation that can bring to surface and transform our collective assumptions and certainties. And, he compared dialogue to superconductivity. So here's our little quantum physics moment, if you will. He says that at higher temperatures, electrons act like separate parts, scattering into a random movement and lose momentum, maybe bumping in, crashing into each other, getting a little bit of chaos, if you will. And when the electrons are cooled to low temperatures, they act more like a coherent whole, and they flow around obstacles without colliding with one another. Kind of, I always the metaphor of dancing. They're kind of dancing around each other with a high level of energy. So that's the, how things can be. And I guess the analogy is that, not cool down things, but perhaps in dialogue, we're slowing down things. We're slowing down the conversation, taking the time to explore. Dialogue, kind of visualize, a circle. The dialogue is a process by which the conversation resides in the middle of us all in a circle, that it's all, we're sharing what we're thinking into the middle to come up with some collective meaning. And, two basic, approaches to dialogue are what? Inquiry, asking questions of each other to find out, to explore others' understandings. And then advocacy. We all may have a position or an opinion, and we can put that forth, but not in a way that's trying to immediately debate or argue or convince, but to explore the various positions with questions so that we can come to some sort of, shall we say, collective meaning. And that is, in essence, the model of dialogue. And again, hopefully, we build this into our facilitative mindset. It's a rarefied opportunity to slow things down, but, there may be opportunities to build in at certain times to enhance the communication in how we're facilitating whatever we're working on. Let's talk a little bit about cognition, cognitive science, if you will. This model was developed by the Institute of Cultural Affairs. They have a whole series of facilitative trainings. I think the best known for using Post-it notes on the wall and moving things around and having people engage in a facilitative process that way. They came up with this very simple, unique, and I think elegant, model for explaining how people, process information in our brains, our minds. And it goes through this, what they call aura. If you look at the first letter of each of the four boxes there, that's what this is about. So let's go through them. Initially, in facilitating, you want to find out, again, back to the facts. What are we all grappling with? What's the facts? What's the data? What's the information that we're using to have a facilitative process with? And then once we maybe share our understanding of what the objective facts are, let's reflect for a second. What's our feelings about this? Do we have certain feelings about good, bad, right, wrong, indifferent? Can we share those? What's our reflection on that? From there, can we interpret what this may mean for us individually or collectively? What's the meaning of what we've just brought up? And then move to a decisional action and to move forward. And put this in context. Let me ask you this: have you been in facilitating brainstorming sessions where people leap to that final box, the sigil in action before you, process the first part of it, and how well does that work? So again, this is a way to kind of move through a way that we can process information in a systematic, if you will, way. So, just for the fun of it, let's play this out. I mean, again, let's talk. I mean, I've done this presentation for a little over 30 minutes. Let me ask you, as a personal reflection for each of you on your own, what have you heard so far? What information? What's come up for you? What stood out for you thus far in what I've been sharing with you? So, what's your feelings about that? Is it resonating? Does it, make sense? What are you feeling about me? How I've been presenting this? It's all there, so there's that. And then, this has been, this is a professional development session, is there meaningfulness in this for you in your own practice? Can you find some interpretive guidance at how this may affect or add value to what you're doing? And with that, are there some decisions you may want to make? I've been going through this pretty quickly with various models, but are there some that you may want to explore more, take further, or is this something that okay, I know this already, and you can move on? So again, it's just a way to facilitate a conversation or a dialogue in a way that we can process information to come to some sort of perhaps consensus even. So again, another facilitative mindset approach. Talk now about process awareness, some of the dynamics that occur within any facilitative group that one can be aware of. This model, if you will, is adapted from the work of Arnold Mindell and the Process Work Center. I've been a student of process-oriented psychology, which this is based on. Mindell, interesting fellow himself. His first work was as a physicist, and then became a Jungian analyst and created this Process Work Center, which is in Portland, Oregon. He's written many books on the topic that deal with conflict resolution, facilitation. Their approach to facilitation ranges in three separate arenas: inner work, personal work, relationship work, and then what they refer to as world work. They do a lot of work worldwide, dealing with some of these larger social issues. And so this, what I'm going to walk through with you now, are basically some things to consider in your own facilitative mindset as you are working with a group. On the left there, the first is the field. The atmosphere or climate of a group, the emotion of it, the situation. Sometimes, we're doing facilitation with a group that just wants to be there. There's a motivation. Sometimes people are mandated to be there. Sometimes there's some tension going on already that you can, palpably feel. And so that becomes an awareness of, what's the field like? And, you can always, check in with people. Sometimes it changes over a course of time that the energy changes, and, your own approach to how you want to check in with people about, how they're, how the atmosphere is for them. Then we have roles. Roles are positions of or identity that can be named and separate from one's own job role. We all have, perhaps roles when we participate in groups. Facilitative role. There's the supportive role, the subject matter expert role, the challenger role, questioner role. All these, play into the success and the dynamics of a group. Sometimes, within particular teams and the like, someone is also, shall we say, consciously or unconsciously delegated to hold on to a particular role all the time, whether they know it or not. However, as a facilitator, you can, name that to help people explore other ways of engaging with the group. And it's always good to mix around, and as your role as a facilitator can support people in the role they're taking, especially if there's, some, dynamic going on. With that, rank, rank and privilege, if you will. Rank has more to do with the power that exists. It could be conscious, unconscious, dealing with the culture. Obviously, people, hierarchies, executives have rank. Certain departments have, rank, which ones get the biggest budget. So who may think they have the bigger say or to engage in it, how are people showing up, who's dominating, who may be more reticent to speak, and those, factors play out, and your own awareness as a facilitator, and basically be able to name it, if you will, when, things become needing to, move things easier through the, process. There's something called an edge, which is basically an experience of being limited or inhibited from communicating or doing something. There's a risk factor, a fear that kind of stops things. Sometimes people within the group have a edge because of the various dynamics that occur, or you as a facilitator may have an edge. And I'm going to explore that with you right after this. Let's figure out, what can you say or not say? And with that, becomes what's referred to as a hot spot. Sometimes one of those intense moments of perhaps conflict or raised voices where, angry, something's really getting more from a dialogue to a debate or an argument, if you will. And also, similarly, a frozen moment where everyone's clammed up, it's, nothing's happening. So again, from a facilitative mindset point of view, being aware of some of these dynamics and being able to perhaps name them or call them out and bring them to awareness, consciousness within a group to help facilitate things moving forward. So let me guide you through another reflection, and this is focused on what I just shared with you, especially about edges. So first of all, reflect on what roles have you played in groups. Again, not necessarily your job roles, but the dynamic role that you have played, or the that you have had, and maybe actually which ones may you felt have been more comfortable for you or easier for you to do in groups. Sometimes the facilitator role is kind of, we're separate from that. We're kind of just a little bit outside of it, so we're not participant, but nonetheless, we within a group we also have our ways of doing things. So what do you find easier to do? So, of course, the other side is, what do you find more difficult for you to do? Edge, what can you say or not say? Again, there's risks. All this has to do with potentially risks involved, especially as a facilitator and the like. I know as an outside consultant, sometimes there's risk in bringing things up because it may not be received well or people ready for it, which can impact how the work is getting accomplished, or what may be the consequences of that. So not to say that there's anything wrong with it, but there's an awareness of what can you say or not say, or particular things that inhibit you. Again, and maybe this relates to conflict. We all have different approaches to conflict. How do we deal with it? Are we comfortable with dealing with conflict or not? That becomes a edge, especially as a facilitator, dealing with when some of these things may come up. So again, what stops you from saying or doing these things? So, that's what I've been speaking about. And then, reflect for a minute, where do you feel your growing points are? Again, this is all professional development. We're all growing. I mean, gosh, I can't tell you how many edges and challenges I've gone through over the years. And so, this is all a unfolding process. Again, maybe apply to what we've alluded to, the development of self as instrument. Where are your growing points? So, again, please just reflect on this. Is for your own, value. So, no right or wrong answers. In the way of a summary for what I've been discussing with you, maybe look at some of the components that maybe consider aspects of a facilitative mindset. Certainly being open-minded, carefully, listening to all viewpoints, active listening. We went through acknowledging that people have different styles and belief systems, or senses of reality even. So are we able to absorb or listen to all viewpoints? Are knowledgeable? Do we have, when we bring something into a group, is it based on facts or evidence? Perhaps we come to a group with our own subject matter expertise that we're sharing and facilitating. Being mentally active, confronting problems and challenging, being engaged, being there in the moment, if you will. I think be here now. That's one of the major things about having a facilitative mindset, that you're actually in the moment, not thinking about what happened or you're planning to do. So hold that thought. Curious, that you're obviously the questions are probably the core of facilitation. You're trying to get underneath things, developing various levels of questioning to engage people. Being independent, thinker, perhaps you want to disagree or bring up another point. Again, skilled in dialogue, that willingness to slow things down and being thoughtful, advocacy and inquiry balance. Insightful, when we're in a group, especially the facilitator, do we have an insight that we feel may be helpful to share with the group? Are we willing to share that group insight, not only in our own head, but with the group if it's useful? What's useful? Again, self-aware, we all have biases, and we have to sometimes acknowledge those when we're in a process of working with others, and seeing if others are likewise willing to, share theirs. Creative, there's all sorts of different ways of thinking about things, as opposed to the norms, going by the book, so to speak. Are there, throw the book away and find out other ways of doing things. Synthesizing, making those connections, seeing how individual behavior relates to intergroup, the group behavior to organizational culture. They all affect each other. I think, as I mentioned, not only, deal with mediation, not all conflicts are residing only in a person. They may be affected by, the dynamics within a team, department, or an organizational culture. The way we do things around here has affected how people learn to behave one way or the other. Sense of humor. My gosh. I try to keep things light. I mean, it's a challenge at times, of course, because there's always, tension, but, how do you bring that momentary of lightness to help relieve the tension, to help get the group into a energy of, moving through and onward and through, certain difficulties. And again, bottom line, a role model. Facilitator is expected perhaps to, exhibit those authentic personal powers. We come with our own power within a group, and again, back to the, nature of using self as instrument. How do we show up, and what are we bringing of ourselves to exude our own personal power? Well, okay, I think I've shared with you what I can. Let me share with you, these are the books that I've written, so they're available on Amazon. The top three are the 3 inner work of work guidebooks. They're exercises to guide people through self-coaching in the various arenas, being your best, getting along with others, contributing to your company's success. They're designed in a way to delve deep into, from reflection to action in various topics that relate to those 3. Lower left is Manager's Guide to Engaging Employees, Manager's Guide to Performance Improvement, how to engaging employees. There's a section on role-focused competencies, section on coaching conversations, facilitative practices, learning, how designing, learning opportunities. So it's all embedded in that. There in the middle is kind of expansion of what I've shared with you, some other, more, models, if you will, about cultivating a facilitative mindset. On the right there is integrating what you do with who you are. Came up with a model for 8 levels of awareness that contribute to, who we are, from our inner dynamics to our diversity in the world to how we're perceived in the world and how we're showing up. Again, probably the most relevant to use of self have often been used to help people engage in career development. How to find your niche or how to use your talent in the best way in a job opportunities. And then finally, at this stage of my career, I've developed a series of modules in the context of a facilitator learning praxis to go through many of the things I've already shared with you today about process-oriented approach to organizational effectiveness, using self as instrument, the role of a facilitator, group dynamics, decision-making, change, uncertainty, dealing with that. I've talked a lot about conflict, inclusion, power, major issues, how to deepen the dialogue, the dialogic process, the role-focused approach to performance management, competency development, and motivation and reinforcement, coaching conversations, engage in that, and so in designing how learning opportunities, well, build in learning, modules into the facilitation we do. So there's ways to do that quite simply and elegantly, if you will, to help people, in the performance improvement process. So thank you very much. I appreciate your time, and time for some questions.